Kim Tae-ho stood in the center of the huge room. His hands shook a little as he looked up at the thousands of alien faces staring down at him. The Galactic Council meeting hall was bigger than any building on Earth. The ceiling was so high that clouds formed near the top. Lights from different worlds cast strange colors across the walls. Tae-ho had practiced this speech for months. He was Earth's cultural diplomat, and today was supposed to be special. Today, humanity would share its greatest stories with the galaxy. He had chosen the best legends from his home planet. Stories of brave warriors, clever heroes, and impossible victories. He cleared his throat and began to speak. His voice echoed in the vast space. Honored members of the Galactic Council, Tae-ho sighed. I am here to share the legends of humanity. These stories have guided our people for thousands of years. They show what we believe about courage, honor, and the strength of the human spirit. In the gallery above, Park So-young watched her friend. With worry, she could see that some of the aliens were already making faces. The insect-like Vextar were clicking their sharp mouth parts. The crystal beings called Quellens were flashing annoyed colors. This was not starting well. Tae-ho continued, not noticing the growing restlessness in the crowd. Let me tell you about Admiral Yi Sun-sin. He was a Korean naval commander who lived 500 years ago. With just 13 ships, he defeated over 300 enemy vessels. The enemy had better weapons and more soldiers, but Yi Sun-sin used smart tactics and brave fighting to win. A loud clicking sound came from the Vextar section. One of them stood up on its 6 legs. Human delegate, it said in a voice like grinding metal. Are you saying 13 of your primitive boats destroyed 300 others? This is clearly impossible. Tae-ho felt heat rise in his cheeks. It is documented history. Admiral Yi used the narrow straits to his advantage. He documented fantasy more likely, interrupted another voice. This came from Morthuk, the Ya council speaker. He was twice as tall as any human, with 6 powerful arms and skin like gray stone. Please continue with your stories. The way Morthuk said stories made it sound like lies. Tae-ho tried to keep going. From ancient Greece, we have the legend of Achilles. He was a warrior so skilled that he could defeat entire armies by himself. In the Great War of Troy, laughter erupted from several sections of the hall. The Vextar were making their horrible, clicking sounds. The Quellens pulsed with bright, mocking colors. Even some of the smaller species joined in. One being defeating armies called out a voice from the Catherian section. Human, your physics education must be very poor. One individual cannot possibly generate enough kinetic energy to... Perhaps they mean he had advanced weapons? Suggested another alien. Some kind of energy projection device? No, said Morthuk, waving 4 of his arms. They claim he did this with simple metal tools. Swords and spears, if I understand correctly. More laughter filled the hall. Tae-ho felt his face burning with shame, but he pressed on. Maybe the next story would be better received. From the north of Europe comes the legend of Thor, god of thunder. He could lift mountains and strike down giants with his mighty hammer. Gods now, shouted someone from the crowd. The humans believed their own people were gods. The laughter was getting louder. Tae-ho looked up at Park So-young. Her face was tight with anger and embarrassment. Near her sat Lee Dong-woo and Choi Ji-min, the other human diplomats. They all looked like they wanted to disappear. Morthuk raised all 6 arms for silence. The noise died down, but Tae-ho could still hear quiet chuckling from various sections. Human delegate, Morthuk said in a voice that pretended to be kind. Surely these are children's stories? Tales told to amuse the young? Your species cannot seriously believe that beings with your physical limitations could perform such feats. Taeho's mouth felt dry. These legends represent the ideals of humanity. They show what we strive to become. They inspire us to. But you present them as if they were real events, interrupted Avexstar. As if your people actually accomplished these impossible things. The stories may be exaggerated, Taeho admitted, but they are based on real people who did extraordinary things. Humans who refused to give up when faced with impossible odds. Warriors who found ways to win against enemies much stronger than themselves. This brought a new wave of amused sounds from the audience. The crystal Quellens were now pulsing in patterns that their translation devices labeled as condescending amusement. Morthek stood up to his full height. His shadow fell across Taeho like a dark cloud. Honored human, I think we understand. Now, your species tells stories about impossible victories because you have never faced truly dangerous enemies. You create fantasies about defeating superior forces because you have never met superior forces. The hall erupted in agreement. Clicking, flashing, and various alien sounds of approval echoed from every section. Your legends speak of lifting unmovable objects because your people have never encountered truly unmovable objects. Continued. Morthek, you dream of defeating countless enemies because you have never faced an enemy that could actually challenge you. Taeho tried to speak, but his voice was lost in the noise of the crowd. These stories are touching, said Morthek with fake sympathy. They show how a young species might imagine heroism before learning the real limits of physics and biology. But surely you do not expect the advanced civilizations of this galaxy to take such fairy tales seriously. The word fairy tales hit Taeho like a physical blow. Around the hall, aliens were nodding their various heads and making sounds of agreement. Some were still laughing. In the gallery, Park So-young was gripping the railing so hard her knuckles were white. Lee Dong-woo had his head in his hands. Choi Ji-min was staring at the floor. Morthek gestured toward Taeho with two of his arms. We appreciate the entertainment value of these human myths. Perhaps next time you could share some of your actual history instead of these impossible fantasies. The session ended with polite but hollow applause. As the aliens filed out, Taeho could hear them talking among themselves. Words like primitive and childish reached his ears. Some were already making jokes about human superheroes and magic warriors. Taeho stood alone in the center of the great hall as the lights dimmed. His carefully prepared presentation had become a source of amusement for the entire galaxy. The legends that meant so much to humanity's stories of courage and determination, that had inspired billions of people, had been dismissed as the fantasies of a backward species. Above him, Park So-young was making her way down to the main floor. Her face was set in hard lines. The other diplomats followed, all looking defeated. Taeho, Park So-young said when she reached him, it's not your fault. They just don't understand. But Taeho was not sure about that. Maybe the aliens were. Right, maybe humanity's legends really were just stories. Maybe real warriors did not exist outside of human imagination. As they walked toward the exit, none of them noticed the message arriving at the station's docking control. A request for landing permission from an unmarked ship. The vessel's identification was minimal, just a name and a rank that meant nothing to the alien controllers. The ship was granted permission to dock. Its passenger would arrive in 3 days. His name was Kang Min-ho, and he had been listening to the broadcast of the cultural exchange session. He had heard every laugh, every mocking comment, every word that dismissed humanity's greatest stories as impossible lies. Min-ho had fought in the Terran colonial wars. He knew the truth about human legends. They were not fantasies at all. They were just incomplete. 3 days had passed since the disaster in the council hall. Taeho had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the alien laughter echoing in his head. The other human diplomats were trying to be supportive, but he could see the disappointment in their faces. Park So-young had spent the time trying to do damage control. She met with alien representatives, trying to explain human culture in different ways. But the damage was done. Humanity was now known across the galaxy as the species that told impossible stories and believed them to be real. The morning of the third day brought an unexpected message to the diplomatic quarters. A ship had requested permission to dock, and it was registered as human. That was strange, because no other human vessels were scheduled to arrive for weeks. Tae-ho was in the common area when the docking announcement came over the station speakers. Attention diplomatic staff. Incoming human vessel requesting immediate meeting with cultural delegate Kim Tae-ho. Park So-young looked up from her data pad. Did you request backup? No, Tae-ho said. I have no idea who this could be. Lee Dong-woo joined them from the kitchen area. Maybe Earth Command sent someone to help clean up the mess? They all walked to the observation deck to watch the ship dock. What they saw made them all stop and stare. The vessel was unlike any human diplomatic ship they had ever seen. It was small, dark, and covered in scars. Parts of the hull looked like they had been melted and reformed. There were no bright colors or friendly symbols. This ship looked like it had been through a war. What kind of diplomatic vessel is that? Choi Ji-min whispered. Park So-young was checking her data pad. The registration says it's a private vessel. Owner listed as Kang Min-ho. Classification? She paused and looked at the screen again. Classification is listed as Special Operations, Level Omega. They had never heard of Level Omega before. The docking process was smooth and quiet. No fanfare, no announcements. The ship simply attached to the station, like it belonged there. Within minutes, a message arrived requesting a private meeting with Tae-ho. The meeting was set for 1 hour later in a small conference room on the diplomatic level. Tae-ho arrived early, nervous and curious. He had no idea what to expect from this mysterious visitor. When the door opened, Tae-ho felt his breath catch in his throat. The man who walked in was not particularly tall. He was maybe average height for a human, with black hair and dark eyes. He wore simple clothes that looked like they had seen hard use. But there was something about him that made the air in the room feel different. Heavier somehow. Tae-ho had met military people before. This was different. This man moved like violence, was always just one thought away, but controlled, contained. His eyes swept the room in a way that suggested he had already planned 3 different ways to exit if needed. You are Kim Tae-ho, the man said. It was? Not a question. Yes, I am. And you are Kang Min-ho? The man nodded and sat down across from Tae-ho. His movements were precise, economical. I heard your presentation to the council. Tae-ho felt heat rise in his cheeks again. I suppose the whole galaxy has heard about it by now. It was a disaster. Why do you think it was a disaster? A question surprised Tae-ho. Because they laughed at us. They dismissed our entire cultural heritage as fantasy. They think humans are primitive storytellers who cannot tell the difference between fiction and reality. Min-ho was quiet for a long moment. He seemed to be studying Tae-ho's face. And you think they are right? Tae-ho stopped. He had been asking himself that same question for 3 days. I do not know anymore. Maybe our legends are just stories. Maybe humans have always exaggerated their achievements. Tell me about Admiral Yi Sun-sin, Min-ho said suddenly. Tae-ho blinked. What? You mentioned him in your presentation. Tell me what you know about him. Tae-ho was confused by the change of subject, but he answered. He was a Korean naval commander during the Japanese invasions. He won many battles against larger forces. The most famous was at Myeongyang, where he defeated over 300 ships with only 13 of his own. How did he do it? He used the narrow strait to limit how many enemy ships could attack at once. He positioned his forces at the narrowest point and used the tide to his advantage. The enemy had to come at him in a line instead of surrounding him. Min-ho nodded. Smart tactics. What else? He had better ship designs. His turtle ships had iron plating and multiple cannon positions. But mostly, his crews were better trained and more disciplined than the enemy. So he won through superior strategy, technology, and training? Yes, but Tae-ho hesitated. The odds were still impossible. 13 ships against over 300 should not work, even with all those advantages. Min-ho leaned back in his chair. Have you ever been? In a real fight, Tae-ho? A life or death situation where everything depended on you not losing? No, Tae-ho admitted. I have, Min-ho said quietly. Many times. And I can tell you something about impossible odds. They stop being impossible when losing means everyone you care about dies. There was something in Min-ho's voice that made Tae-ho sit up straighter. This was not theory or philosophy. This was experience. You said you heard my presentation, Tae-ho said. Where were you? My ship has access to council broadcasts. I was 3 days out when I heard what happened. And you came here because ... Min-ho was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was even softer than before. Because someone needs to show them that human legends are not fantasies. What do you mean? Instead of answering directly, Min-ho reached into his jacket and pulled out a small data pad. He placed it on the table and activated it. A holographic display appeared showing what looked like military records. Do you know what the Terran colonial wars were? Min-ho asked. Tae-ho squinted at the display. Most of the text was blacked out or marked as classified. I have heard of them, but the details are not public. Some kind of conflict during the early colonization period? 15 years of fighting, Min-ho said. Humanity's first real war against a technologically superior enemy. The hegemony had better ships, better weapons, better everything. They outnumbered us 50-1. Min-ho touched the pad, and new images appeared. Battle reports, casualty figures, tactical assessments. Most of the details were still classified, but Tae-ho could see enough to understand that this had been a massive conflict. How did it end? Tae-ho asked. We won, Min-ho said simply. Against 50-1 odds? Against worse odds than that, by the end. Min-ho deactivated the display. The aliens in that council hall think human legends are impossible because they measure them against alien standards. They think in terms of individual physical capability, technological advantage, numerical superiority. Min-ho stood up and walked to the small window overlooking the docking bay. They do not understand what humans do when we have something worth protecting. They do not understand what we become when we refuse to accept defeat. Tae-ho stared at the man's back. What are you saying? Min-ho turned around. For the first time since entering the room, he smiled. It was not a happy expression. I am saying that your presentation was not wrong, Tae-ho. Your mistake was thinking you needed to convince them with words. He gestured toward the door. This station has combat facilities, does it not? Training areas where warriors can test their skills? Yes, but why would Min-ho was already moving toward the door? Because sometimes the best way to defend human culture is to demonstrate why our legends exist in the first place. As he reached the door, Min-ho paused and looked back. Get some rest, Tae-ho. Tomorrow is going to be interesting. After he left, Tae-ho sat alone in the conference room for a long time. He kept thinking about the classified records, the casual way Min-ho had mentioned winning an impossible war, and most of all, that cold smile. Park So-young found him there an hour later. How did the meeting go? Tae-ho looked up at her. I think we might be about to find out if human legends are real. After all. Outside, word was already spreading through the station about the mysterious human who had arrived. Alien security officers who had processed his docking request were talking in hushed tones about his ship's battle damage and the classified nature of his identification codes. Station Commander Velinara, a proud Kytherian warrior, had personally reviewed his credentials. What she found in the restricted files made her call an emergency meeting with her senior staff. This human, she told them, is not a diplomat. Her officers waited for more information. His service record is almost entirely classified, but what I can see mentions something called the Iron Ghosts Unit. Does anyone know what that designation means? No one did, but they all agreed that they should keep a very close watch on Kong. Min-Ho. None of them realized they should have been more worried about what he was planning to show the galaxy. The next council session was supposed to be about trade agreements, boring discussions about shipping routes and tariff structures. The kind of meeting where half the delegates would fall asleep and the other half would spend their time planning. Lunch. Tae-ho sat in his usual spot, still feeling the shame from his failed presentation. He had barely slept, thinking about his conversation with Min-ho. The mysterious soldier had not contacted him again, and Tae-ho was beginning to wonder if the whole meeting had been some kind of strange dream. Then he saw Min-ho enter the observer section. The man moved through the rows of seats like he owned the place. Aliens turned to look at him as he passed, and Tae-ho noticed something odd. The bigger, more aggressive species seemed to shrink back slightly as he walked by. Even the proud Kytherians, who feared nothing, watched him with wary eyes. Min-ho found a seat in the back and settled in to wait. He did not look at Tae-ho or acknowledge anyone else. He just sat there, perfectly still, like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. Council Speaker Morthek called the session to order. His 6 arms gestured grandly as he began the opening remarks. Welcome, honored delegates, to today's discussion of commercial regulations. That was when Tae-ho noticed that Morthek had prepared something extra. A small holographic projector sat on the speaker's podium, and there were several data files loaded into the system. Before we begin our scheduled business, Morthek continued, I thought it might be amusing to revisit our recent cultural exchange. I have prepared a small demonstration of why we must be careful to distinguish between legend and reality. Tae-ho's stomach dropped. Morthek was going to humiliate humanity again. The holographic display activated, showing a 3-dimensional battlefield. Morthek's voice took on the tone of a patient teacher explaining simple concepts to slow students. The human delegate told us about Admiral Yi Sun-sin, who supposedly defeated 300 ships with only 13. Let us examine this claim scientifically. The display showed numerical data about ship sizes, weapon ranges, and crew numbers. Morthek walked around the projection, pointing out different elements with his multiple arms. As you can see, the mathematics are quite clear. 13 primitive vessels, even with superior positioning, cannot generate sufficient firepower to disable 300 enemy ships. The energy requirements alone exceed what their technology could produce. Quiet. Laughter began to ripple through the hall. The Vixtar were making their clicking sounds again. Several other species joined in with their own versions of amusement. Now let us examine the legend of Achilles, Morthek continued. The display changed to show a single humanoid figure surrounded by hundreds of enemies. One individual defeating entire armies. The physics are laughably impossible. The projection ran a simulation showing how quickly a single warrior would be overwhelmed by multiple attackers. The result was obvious: defeat in seconds. The human nervous system cannot process information quickly enough to track multiple opponents, Morthek explained. Their muscle fibers cannot generate sufficient force to penetrate multiple layers of armor. Their endurance is limited by basic biological constraints. More laughter filled the hall. Some aliens were pulling up their own displays, adding commentary about human physical limitations. The mockery was becoming a group activity. Teo felt his face burning again. This was worse than the first presentation. At least then he had been sharing stories that mattered to his people. Now those same stories were being used as examples of human stupidity. Park, So Young, was gripping her seat arms so tightly that the metal was bending. Lee Dong-woo looked like he wanted to disappear. Choi Ji-min was staring at the floor, unable to watch. "The pattern is clear," Morthic announced to the increasingly amused crowd. "Humans create impossible legends because they have never faced truly impossible situations. They imagine defeating superior enemies because they have never encountered truly superior enemies." That was when Minho stood up. The laughter died instantly. Every alien in the hall turned to look at the human in the back row. There was something about the way he moved that made even the largest, most confident species fall silent. Minho did not hurry. He stood calmly, brushed imaginary dust from his jacket, and then spoke in a voice that carried easily through the vast chamber. "Council Speaker Morthic." Even his way of saying the name was different. Not respectful, not mocking, just direct. Like he was addressing an equal. Morthic's 6 arms trembled slightly. "Yes, human observer. You seem very confident in your analysis of human capabilities." The temperature in the hall seemed to drop several degrees. Aliens who had been laughing moments before were now looking around nervously. Some primitive survival instinct was telling them that something dangerous had entered their safe space. "I am confident in science," Morthic replied, though his voice had lost some of its earlier authority. "Mathematics does not lie." "Neither do legends," Minho said quietly. "They just use different measurements." He began walking down the steps toward the main floor. Every eye in the hall followed his movement. Seasoned warriors from a dozen species found themselves calculating distances to exits. "I believe," Minho continued in that same calm voice, "that you have a facility on this station called the Trials of Valor." Morthic's gray skin somehow managed to become paler. You know the Trials?" "I know that warrior species use them to prove their combat traditions. I know that they are designed to test every aspect of a fighter's capabilities under the most extreme conditions possible." Minho had reached the main floor now. He stood in the same spot where Taeho had given his presentation, but the atmosphere was completely different. Where Taeho had seemed small and nervous, Minho seemed to fill the entire space. "I formally invoke the right of cultural defense," he announced. The hall erupted in shocked murmurs. The right of cultural defense was an ancient protocol, rarely used and never by a species as physically limited as humans. Morthic raised all 6 arms for silence. "Human, do you understand what you are requesting? The Trials of Valor are not games. They are designed to push the greatest warriors of the galaxy to their absolute limits. Many do not survive." "I understand perfectly," Minho replied. "You claim that human legends are impossible fantasies. I claim they are historical documentation. The trials will determine which of us is correct." Station Commander Velinara stood up in the command section. She was a Catherian, bred for war, trained from birth in combat. Her species produced some of the finest warriors in the galaxy. "Human," she called down to Minho, "I have studied your species' physical capabilities. You are not enhanced. You have no cybernetic implants, no genetic modifications. The trials will kill you." Minho looked up at her. When he spoke, his voice was conversational, almost friendly. "Commander, during the war, my unit held a position against enemy forces for 73 days. We were outnumbered 400 to 1. We had no supplies, no reinforcements, and no chance of rescue. The hall was completely silent now. When relief finally arrived, do you know what they found? Velinara did not answer. They found us still holding the position. All enemies eliminated, all objectives secured. Minho's voice never changed tone, never became threatening or boastful. He was simply stating facts. The enemy casualties were extensive. He turned back to Morthic. Your trials are designed to test alien warriors. They measure alien concepts of strength, speed, and endurance. But you have never tested what humans call determination. Morthic's 6 arms were shaking visibly now. Human, even if you survive. The trials, what will it prove? You are one individual. Your species cannot all be. That is where you are wrong, Minho interrupted. I am not special council speaker. I am standard military personnel. Every human colony has thousands like me. Every human world has millions. The implications of this statement hit the assembled aliens like a physical blow. If this human was standard, what did that say about the rest of his species? The trials consist of 5 challenges, Velinara said from the command deck. Her voice was strained. Each one is designed to be more difficult than the last. The final challenge has a mortality rate of over 60%, even among our most elite warriors. Minho nodded politely. Thank you for the information, Commander. When can we begin? The formal challenge had been issued. Under galactic law, it could not be refused. But as the delegates filed out to prepare for the upcoming trials, many were already updating their species intelligence files on Humanity. If the humans had been telling the truth about their legends. If their stories were actually history. If this one standard human could do what he claimed. Then the galaxy had seriously underestimated the small, primitive species from the 3rd planet of an unremarkable star. Teho was the last to leave the hall. As he passed Minho, the soldier placed a hand on his shoulder. Your presentation was not wrong, Minho said quietly. You just gave it to the wrong audience. Some people need to see the truth demonstrated before they can believe it. As Teho walked away, he heard Minho talking to himself, so quietly that only enhanced hearing could pick it up. Besides, the soldier murmured, it has been a while since I had a proper workout. The trials would begin in 24 hours. For the first time in galactic history. The arena was packed. Word of the humans' challenge had spread across the station overnight. Every alien who could find an excuse to be there had crowded into the observation decks. This was historic, the first time a human had attempted the trials of valor. Most of them had come to watch a spectacular failure. The arena itself was a marvel of technology. It could create any environment, any opponent, any challenge through advanced holographic projection and gravitational manipulation. The trials had been designed by the greatest warrior cultures of the galaxy, each one intended to test a different aspect of combat capability. Te-Ho sat in the diplomatic section with Park So-young, Lee Dong-woo, and Choi Ji-min. They all looked nervous. None of them really knew what Minho was capable of, but they had all seen the casualty statistics for the trials. Station Commander Velinara stood at the control station, reviewing the trial parameters one final time. Her Catherian heritage made her an expert in combat, but even she was worried about what was about to happen. Final warning, she announced over the arena speakers. Human participant Kong Minho, you may withdraw from the trials at any time before they begin. There is no shame in recognizing the limits of your species. Minho stood in the center of the arena floor, looking small and fragile compared to the massive space around him. He wore simple combat clothing and carried no weapons. By alien standards, he was pitifully under-equipped. I appreciate your concern, Commander, he called back. Please begin when ready. Valinara activated the first trial. The arena transformed around Minho, walls rising and shifting to form a complex maze. The lighting dimmed to an eerie twilight, and strange sounds echoed from the depths of the labyrinth. This was the maze of mirrors, designed to test psychological strength. The first trial, Valinara announced to the crowd, forces the participant to confront their deepest fears while navigating a deadly maze. The average completion time for successful attempts is 47 minutes. Most participants require psychiatric treatment afterward. The maze was more than just a physical challenge. The mirrors showed twisted reflections that revealed hidden fears and traumatic memories. Many warriors had broken down completely within the first few minutes. Unable to cope with what they saw, Minho began walking into the maze calmly, as if he were taking a stroll through a park. The first mirror he encountered showed him a reflection of himself covered in blood, standing over the bodies of civilians. The image was designed to trigger guilt and horror. Minho looked at it for a moment, nodded, and kept walking. The second mirror showed him as a monster, with glowing red eyes and claws dripping with gore. Another psychological attack meant to make him fear what he had become. Minho examined the reflection thoughtfully, then moved on. In the observation deck, alien psychologists were monitoring his vital signs. His heart rate was steady. His brain activity showed no signs of stress or panic. This was completely abnormal. The mirrors became more aggressive, showing him scenes of friends dying, cities burning, children screaming. Each one was carefully designed to break down the mental defenses that warriors relied on. Minho walked through them all without stopping. 17 minutes after entering the maze, he emerged at the exit. A new record by 30 minutes. The crowd was silent. This was not what they had expected. Valinara activated her communicator. Human, what did you see in the mirrors? Minho looked up at the control booth. Tuesday, he said simply, before anyone could ask what that meant. The arena was transforming again for the second trial. The beast hunt was simpler in concept, but more dangerous in execution. Each participant had to track and kill a holographic recreation of their homeworlds. Most dangerous predator using only primitive weapons. The computer system spent several seconds analyzing Earth's ecosystem, searching for humanity's greatest natural enemy. The delay was unusual. Most systems could identify a species' primary predator instantly. Finally, the hologram materialized. The crowd gasped. It was another human. The system had created a perfect replica of a human soldier in full combat gear, armed with advanced weapons and tactical equipment. It stood at the far end of the arena, scanning for targets with cold, professional efficiency. This was unprecedented. The system had never identified a species as its own greatest predator. Minho was given a selection of primitive weapons. Spears, knives, clubs. He examined them briefly and set them all aside. Instead, he began walking toward the armed hologram, empty-handed. The holographic soldier detected him immediately and raised its weapon. Minho kept walking, his hands visible and empty. Contact, the hologram said in a voice identical to Minho's own. Unknown human approaching. Identify yourself. Minho stopped about 10 meters away. Sergeant Kong Minho, 3rd Colonial Marines, Iron Ghost Battalion. The hologram lowered its weapon slightly. Iron Ghosts were disbanded 5 years ago. Officially. Minho agreed. But you know what they say about old habits. What followed was not a fight. It was a conversation. Minho talked to the holographic soldier as if it were a real person, asking about its mission, its orders, its reasons for being there. The hologram, programmed to respond like a real human, began to engage in dialogue. My orders are to eliminate all threats in this area, the hologram explained. And what defines a threat? Minho asked. Anyone who opposes the mission parameters. What if the mission parameters are wrong? The hologram paused, processing this question. Its programming was sophisticated enough to consider moral and ethical implications, just like a real human soldier would. If the mission parameters are wrong, it said slowly, then following them would make me the threat. Minho nodded. That's the difference between us and them, he said, gesturing toward the observation decks filled with aliens. We don't just follow programming, we choose. The hologram stood silent for a long moment, then set down its weapons. Mission parameters rejected, standing down. The trial ended not with violence, but with two humans embracing like old friends. In the control booth, Velinara was staring at her instruments in confusion. How did he do that? The system is designed to create an unstoppable predator. Her technical officer, a multi-eyed Quell, was running diagnostics. The system correctly identified humans as their own most dangerous predator, but it did not account for human psychology. They are the only species we have encountered that can convince their predators to become their allies. The third trial began immediately. The Endurance Crucible was a 72-hour survival scenario in a hostile environment. Participants had to protect a non-combatant civilian hologram while dealing with extreme weather, dangerous terrain, and periodic attacks from automated defense systems. Most alien warriors barely survived by focusing solely on their own needs. The civilian hologram usually died within the first day. Minho took a different approach. Instead of just surviving, he began improving the situation. He built shelter not just for himself, but for the civilian. He created water collection systems and identified edible plants. He established defensive positions and set up early warning systems. By the end of the first day, he had turned the hostile environment into a fortified camp. By the end of the second day, he was teaching the civilian hologram basic survival and self-defense skills. When the rescue team arrived at the end of 72 hours, they found a thriving mini-settlement with sustainable food and water sources, multiple defensive positions, and a civilian who was now capable of surviving independently. The alien observers were no longer laughing. They were taking notes. The fourth trial was called the Impossible Choice. Participants faced a scenario where they had to choose between their own survival and the survival of innocent civilians. It was designed to test moral character under extreme pressure. Most species had developed philosophical frameworks for handling such situations. The trial's computer system contained detailed profiles of every known warrior, culture's ethical codes. It did not contain a profile for human ethics. Minho broke the trial system. When presented with the choice between saving himself and saving civilians, he refused to choose. Instead, he found a third option that saved everyone, including enemies, who did not deserve salvation. The system crashed trying to process an outcome it was never designed to handle. When technicians reset the simulation, Minho broke it again, in a completely different way. After the seventh system crash, Morthic himself entered the control room. What is he doing? The chief technician was frantically running diagnostics. He is not playing by the rules. He is changing them. Our system can simulate any known form of tactical thinking, but this is something entirely different. Different. How? He does not accept that the choice is impossible. Every time we present him with an unsolvable problem, he solves it anyway. By now, the alien observers were completely silent. Representatives who had been mocking human legends just days before were requesting classified information about Earth's military history. What they found in the few available records spoke of something called the Siege of Kepler 442b and casualty. Reports that made no sense until someone realized the numbers were not human losses, but enemy casualties. The final trial was about to begin, and every alien in the station was beginning to understand that they had seriously underestimated the small, seemingly primitive species. The final trial was called The Last Stand. It was designed to be unwinnable. Every alien warrior who had ever attempted it knew this going in. The point was not to win, but to face inevitable defeat with honor and courage. The scenario was simple and brutal. The participant was placed in a fortified position with limited ammunition and supplies. Wave after wave of enemies would attack until the defender was overwhelmed. The only variables were how long they could hold out and how many enemies they could take with them. The record was held by a Catherian champion who had lasted 4 hours and eliminated over 200 attackers before falling. It was considered an impossible achievement that would never be matched. Minho stood in the center of the fortified position, examining the available weapons and supplies. The setup was standard, enough ammunition for maybe an hour of heavy fighting, basic medical supplies, some emergency rations. Nothing special, but as he looked around, something changed in his expression. The calm, controlled demeanor was still there, but underneath it, Tejo could see something else awakening. Something that had been sleeping until now. Beginning final trial, Velinara announced. First wave incoming. The enemies materialized at the far end of the arena. Holographic constructs designed to fight and think like real soldiers. They were well-armed, well-trained, and completely expendable. The system could generate unlimited numbers of them. They began their advance, using proper military tactics and coordinated movement. This was not a mindless charge, but a professional assault. Minho did not fire a single shot. Instead, he left the fortified position and walked toward the attacking force. The alien observers gasped. This was suicide. The entire point of the trial was to use the defensive position to maximize survival time. What is he doing? Morthic whispered from the Yus. Council section, Min Dasho, reached the first group of enemies and began talking to them. Just like in the second trial, he was treating the holograms as if they were real people with real motivations. Who sent you here? He asked the lead attacker. The hologram, programmed to respond realistically, answered, Command ordered the elimination of this position. Why? Strategic necessity. This position threatens our supply lines. Minho nodded thoughtfully. And if this position was not a threat, you would not need to attack it? Correct. What happened next defied every expectation the aliens had about the trial. Instead of fighting the enemy force, Minho began negotiating with them. He explained that the position they were attacking was actually a refugee shelter, not a military installation. He showed them evidence that their commanders had given them false information. The holographic soldiers, programmed with realistic human psychology, began to question their orders. Some of them lowered their weapons. Others demanded proof of Minho's claims. Within 20 minutes, Minho had convinced the entire first wave to stand down. They were not destroyed, they were converted. The system immediately generated a second wave, larger and more aggressive than the first. The trial parameters required continuous escalation until the participant was defeated. Minho used the first wave of converted enemies to help negotiate with the second wave. This is impossible. The chief technician reported to Velinara. The system keeps generating more enemies, but he keeps converting them to his side. We now have over 500 holographic soldiers who are refusing to attack the position. Can you override their programming? We have tried, but they are operating within normal human psychological parameters. Everything they are doing is within the range of realistic human behavior. The trial continued for 6 hours. Each new wave of enemies was met not with gunfire, but with negotiation, evidence, and appeals to their better nature. Minho turned what was supposed to be a desperate last stand into a massive counseling session. By the 7th hour, He had an army of converted enemies, helping him establish supply lines and communication networks. They were building infrastructure instead of destroying it. He has turned the trial into a humanitarian mission, Velinara reported to the increasingly stunned observers. Instead of fighting impossible odds, he has eliminated the reason for fighting. But the system had one final escalation. When diplomacy failed, it generated enemies that could not be reasoned with, mindless drones programmed only to destroy. This was when Min Ho finally picked up a weapon. What followed was unlike anything the aliens had ever seen. Min Ho moved through the attacking drones like death itself. Every shot was perfectly placed. Every movement was efficient and deadly. He wasted no energy, no ammunition, no motion. But he was not fighting alone. The converted enemies fought alongside him, protecting civilians and maintaining defensive positions while he eliminated the threats that could not be negotiated with. The alien observers watched in stunned silence as one human and his converted army destroyed wave after wave of attackers. The casualty count climbed higher and higher. Not human casualties, but enemy casualties. How many has he eliminated? Morthic asked in a shaking voice. Over 3,000, the technician replied. And he shows no signs of slowing down. That is impossible. No individual can sustain that level of combat performance. Sir, the technician said quietly, I do not think he is fighting as an individual anymore. Look at the coordination with his converted allies. Look at how they move together. He has turned this from an individual trial into a team operation. The trial was supposed to end when the participant was defeated or gave up. But Min Ho was not losing. If anything, his position was getting stronger as more enemies were converted, and his army grew larger. After 10 hours, Velinara made an unprecedented decision. She stopped the trial. The arena fell silent. The holographic enemies disappeared. Min Ho stood in the center of what had become a small city, surrounded by hundreds of converted allies and protected civilians. He had not just survived the unwinnable trial. He had won it. The alien observers sat in stunned silence. Everything they thought they knew about warfare, about tactics, about the nature of conflict itself, had been turned upside down. Morthic slowly descended to the arena floor. His 6 arms were trembling as he approached Min Ho. Human, he said, in a voice barely above a whisper. What are you? Min Ho looked at the towering alien council speaker and gave the same calm smile he had worn throughout the trials. I am not special, council speaker. I am standard issue. This is what humans do when we have something worth protecting. He gestured toward the observation decks filled with aliens. Your legends speak of warriors who can defeat impossible odds, who can lift unmovable objects, who can survive unsurvivable challenges. You are right to call our stories legends. Min Ho's voice carried easily through the silent arena. But you were wrong about what legends are. They are not fantasies. They are not exaggerations. They are warnings. He looked directly at Morthic, and the alien took an involuntary step backward. Every human you have met, every diplomat, every cultural attach, every person you dismissed as primitive and weak, they are all capable of this. We just choose not to be. The implications hit the assembled aliens like a physical blow. If this standard human could do what they had just witnessed, what did that say about the rest of his species? Your mistake, Min Ho continued, was thinking that our legends were about individual achievement. They are not. They are about what we become when we have something to protect, what we accomplish when we refuse to accept defeat, what we are willing to do when the alternative is failing the people who depend on us. He started walking toward the exit, then paused and looked back. Thank you for the trials, council speaker. It has been a while since I had a vacation. As Min Ho left, the arena The alien observers sat in complete silence. The only sound was the quiet clicking of datapads as intelligence officers updated their files on Humanity Dot in the diplomatic section. Tai-Ho was staring at the arena floor with new understanding. His presentation had not been wrong. He had shared humanity's greatest legends with the galaxy, just as he had intended. He had simply not realized that they were all true. Park. So Young was the first to speak. Tai-Ho, she said quietly, I think we need to revise our cultural database. Across the station, alien species that had dismissed humanity as primitive began emergency meetings with their military advisors. If the humans had been telling the truth about their legends, if their stories were actually historical records, if their impossible achievements were just Tuesday for them, then the galaxy had seriously underestimated the small species from the third planet of an unremarkable star. Deep in the station's archives, automated systems began updating humanity's classification. Where once it had read primitive mythological traditions, it now read historical documentation, approach with extreme caution. A new note was added to humanity's diplomatic file, species capable of making legends reality. Recommend immediate alliance status. Under no circumstances engage in hostilities. The cultural exchange had been a success after all. The aliens had learned about human legends. They had learned that they were all true, and they had learned that humanity had been trying to warn them all along. 3 months later, when other species asked the Galactic Council about humanity's true capabilities, Morthic had only one response. They told us their legends. We thought they were stories. We were wrong. They were warnings,